بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وعد الله الذين آمنوا منكم وعملوا الصالحات ليستخلفنهم في الأرض كما استخلف الذين من قبلهم وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من قتل معاهدا لم يرح رائحة الجنة وإن ريحها توجد من مسيرة 40 عاما أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Tonight's lecture, if we give it a title, it could be called Political Leadership in Islam. And this is relevant to our series of Aqidah that we have been discussing for the last several months. Believe it or not, yes, leadership, politics, it also has its role or its position within Islamic Aqidah. And you can say basically, just to give you a clear example of that, in al-hukmu illa lillah, right? That the command, the supreme command belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or another ayah, and we'll talk about it inshallah in this lecture as well, أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ. That beware, verily the creation and the command belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from a creedal and from an aqidah perspective, you can see that we believe as Muslims, it is our creed and our aqidah that the supreme command belongs to Allah. And people are not supreme. And people's voting does not make something that Allah has made haram into halal, or something that Allah has made halal into haram. It is not up to the people to decide that. So this is a very clear distinction that we can draw between Western liberal secular democracy and the political system within Islam. So that's just to give you an example of how politics or political leadership in Islam, it ties into Aqidah within Islam. Anyhow, the verse that I recited before you is ayah number 55 of Surah An-Nur. And we'll begin with that for the blessing of the kalam and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, more or less to the effect, that Allah promises those amongst you that believe and do righteous deeds, that لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, that He will grant them authority in the earth. كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ, just as He granted authority to those that came before them, before you. This is an ayah of Surah An-Nur, ayah number 55. In the tafsir of this ayah, Imam Qurtubi rahimahullah gives context, and he says that for 10 years, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the Sahaba faced persecution in Makkah. So the Meccan period of the Prophet ﷺ, 10 years, was a period of persecution. Then after the migration took place to Medina, the same persecution persisted. It continued. And as you all know, that there were no wars that broke out in Makkah, even though it was a period of persecution. All the wars happened after the migration. So the persecution did not stop. Rather, wars began to happen. The first battle of Badr and then Uhud and so on and so forth. All of these battles, they persisted. So someone asked Prophet ﷺ, after they had migrated, after they had went through all of this persecution and now wars and so on and so forth, somebody asked, Ya Rasulullah, will there come a time where we will be able to let our arms down, where we will be able to drop our weapons and live in peace and practice our deen without persecution? So Rasulullah ﷺ replied that soon, inshallah, that time will come. And it is at this moment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayah of Surah An-Nur, in which He promised that He's going to give authority to the Muslims. Basically, with patience, perseverance, and having tahammul and sabr, and tolerating the persecution at the hands of the kuffar and the mushrikeen, that there will come a time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and His rahmah will come into play, and the Muslims will be able to practice their deen in peace. The word that is used in the ayah, لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ. First of all, there's lam al-ta'keed, there's noon al-ta'keed. Anybody who knows the Arabic language, this is basically a qasam. You can say that this is a very strong word. لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ. It comes from the word istikhlaf. And I already translated for you what istikhlaf means. It means to give authority. And the reason why Allah is promising authority will be given to the Muslims is because authority is necessary if a society wants law and order. Okay? Any human civilization, past, present, or future, that lacks law and order, the rule of law, that civilization, that society is unsustainable, and sooner rather than later, that society is going to collapse. That's how important law and order is. And law and order can only be established when there is authority that is heard, authority that is listened to. Right? Let's look at for a moment how Islam defines civilization. What is a nation in Islam? Right? And what is the connection between nations and law and order? So in Islam, dear brothers and sisters, a nation or a civilization is not defined by race, language, culture, etc. It doesn't matter if you're Pakistani or Indian or Syrian or Iraqi or Palestinian. These borders that were drawn on the map based on race and language and culture and cuisine, right? Come on. Dividing people based on the cuisine that they enjoy, the cuisine that they eat, that is not in Islam what decides or defines a nation. Rather, in Islam, a nation is defined by iman and kufr. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ فَمِنْكُمْ كَافِرٌ وَمِنْكُمْ مُؤْمِنٌ. He is the one that created you. And after creating, Allah is making the division here. Allah is dividing into two categories of people. A nation of iman, فَمِنْكُمْ كَافِرٌ وَمِنْكُمْ مُؤْمِنٌ, and a nation of kufr. Right? So this is the concept that the Quran gives us. Muslims and non-Muslims, they are two different nations, even if they are citizens of the same country. So citizenship is not what defines a nation, an ummah in Islam. Ummah is different, and citizenship is a different thing. This is important for us to understand. And this is the reason why in Islam, Muslims do not become heirs of non-Muslims. Nor do non-Muslims become heirs of Muslims. What does that mean? That means that if a father who is a Muslim dies and leaves behind two children, one is a Muslim, one is a non-Muslim, then the Muslim child will inherit from that Muslim father, but the non-Muslim child will not inherit. Similarly, if the father is non-Muslim and leaves behind a Muslim and a non-Muslim child, then the non-Muslim child will inherit, but the Muslim child will not inherit from the non-Muslim father. Okay? So this is what I mean when I say that they are not heirs of one another. Why? Again, because they are, even though they are related biologically, father-son relationship, but in Islam they are two different people. They are two different. That's why Nuh alayhi salam, when the tufan came, the flood came, the great flood at the time of Nuh alayhi salam, and he said that, "Oh Allah, inna bani min ahli." Oh Allah, you promised to spare my family, and my son is from my family. Inna bani min ahli. Wa inna wa'daka al-haq wa anta ahkamul hakimin. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya Nuh, innahu laysa min ahlik. Innahu amalun ghayru salih. Fala tas'al lima laysa laka bihi. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divided him and separated him from his biological father, Nuh alayhi salam, based on his kufr and based on his evil deeds. Number two, that there is no janazah for a non-Muslim. And these are questions that come up. Right? Can a Muslim, non-Muslim be an heir of one another? And what about the janazah, partaking in the funeral of a non-Muslim? Sometimes they're neighbors, sometimes they're acquaintances at work, and so on and so forth. But there's no janazah for a non-Muslim, nor can a non-Muslim be buried amongst the Muslims in the cemetery. They are not permitted to be buried amongst the Muslims. Right? And number 3, we are not even to be at each other's funerals. The Quran states clearly, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ. Do not perform salat or ask forgiveness for any one of them that dies ever. وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ. And do not stand at their grave side. Meaning, do not participate in their funerals. That's what basically it means. Do not be part of their funerals. Now, an important clarification that I want to make is, these are 2 different nations. They have different rights. They have different responsibilities. Now, although each of these categories, Muslims and non-Muslims, they have rights. Okay, non-Muslims, they don't have rights that Muslims have on one another, but they do have human rights. Okay, and they also have responsibilities. So, although each of these groups have their rights and their responsibilities, Islam recognizes pluralism. Islam recognizes pluralism. La ikraha fi din. Islam recognizes that we do not force anybody to become a Muslim. Anybody who is forcibly made a Muslim and does not accept and embrace Islam with their heart, that person, indallah, is not even a Muslim. So there's no point of forcing somebody to be a Muslim, because their Islam will not be acceptable in the eyes of Allah if they don't wholeheartedly embrace Islam. Islam recognizes pluralism, that some people will not accept Islam. Many, or you can say many people will not accept Islam. Islam recognizes that fact. That's the reason why there are laws of dhimmis. There are laws of Ahlul Kitab, minorities, etc. Rather, we can say with confidence, looking at history, that whenever and wherever there was Islamic rule, now be careful, I'm not saying Muslim rule, I'm saying Islamic rule. We'll talk about the difference in a moment, inshallah. Whenever and wherever there was Islamic rule throughout history, we can argue that actually these minorities, Ahlul Kitab, Jews and Christians, Dhimmi people, they actually thrived and they progressed in their coexistence with Muslims. And let me give you an example of that. And I give you this example specifically to counter the propaganda that we hear today, the nonsense that we hear today, that Muslims are taught to hate specifically the Jews. Muslims are taught to hate the Jews. Although, let me remind you, it's Zionist school kids that are taking trips to the border of Gaza and watching the destruction with their eyes. I remind you that it's Zionist elementary and junior high school kids that are taught how to handle weapons. Not kids of Gaza, not kids of Palestine. They're not the ones that are taught to pick up AK-47s and rifles and pistols and things like that. No. And arms and weapons are not distributed amongst the Palestinian population as they are amongst the Zionist settler population. Zionist settler population gets weapons for free. They're handouts. And then they take those weapons and they go and terrorize, grandparents, grandfather, grandmother who have been on that land for who knows how long. And all they're doing is peacefully raising their flock and tending to their olive trees and their land and so on. So to counter this nonsensical propaganda that Muslims hate Jews, hate is not taught in Islam. Hate is not in our legacy. It is not in our blood. And we'll talk about that inshallah. But the example that I want to give you is Musa bin Maymun. In English, Moses bin Maimun, also known as Maimonides, who was born and lived in, I love to say this when I'm here in this masjid, He was born in Qurtuba. He was born in Qurtuba, Andalus, which is known as Muslim Spain. Okay? Maimonides was the most prolific, the most influential Torah scholar, or Torah scholar you can say, because the original Torah that we believe in has been altered and changed, but he was the most prolific and influential Torah scholar of the Middle Ages. Okay? And mind you, that was under Muslim rule. Muslim rule or Islamic rule is what allowed for this Jewish Sephardic rabbi. Okay, and when I say Sephardic, that means Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. Those were Sephardic Jews that used to occupy that area and that used to live in that area. As a matter of fact, Musa bin Maimonides, he actually served as the personal physician of Salahuddin. Salahuddin Ayyubi, the great general who liberated Palestine, okay, and his personal physician was a Jewish rabbi. Okay, if that does not speak pluralism, if that does not speak tolerance, then I don't know what does. Okay? And why would this not be? When Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said in the hadith that I recited before you in the beginning, which goes, "Man qatala mu'ahidan lam yurih ra'ihat al-jannah wa inna rihaha tujadu min masirati 40 'ama." This is in Bukhari, by the way. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever kills a mu'ahid, and a mu'ahid is a person who has been granted a pledge of protection by the Muslims. In other words, you can say like a dhimmi. Okay? Whoever has been granted protection by the Muslims, and some Muslim goes and kills that person, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that this murderer shall not smell the fragrance of paradise. Wa inna rihaha, he goes on, and the fragrance of paradise can be smelled, its fragrance can be smelled from 40 years traveling distance. That's how far the fragrance of Jannah can be smelled, and this person will not be able to smell it, meaning this person will be very, very far away from Jannah. In another hadith, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that if somebody harms a disbeliever that's living under the protection of Muslims, they have harmed me, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. They have actually harmed me. And if they harm me, they have harmed Allah. Look at how stern and a severe warning this is. In another and third hadith that I want to share before you, which is narrated by Imam Abu Dawood, which is in the book of Abu Dawood, أَلَا مَنْ ظَلَمَ مُعَاهِدًا أَوْ انْتَقَصَهُ أَوْ كَلَّفَهُ فَوْقَ طَاقَتِهِ أَوْ أَخَذَ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا بِغَيْرِ طِيبِ نَفْسِهِ فَأَنَا خَصْمُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Beware whoever oppresses a mu'ahid or diminishes the right of a mu'ahid or afflicts, or you can say burdens a mu'ahid above his power, burdens him more than he can bear. أو أخذ منه شيئا بغير طيب نفسه, or he takes something from a mu'ahid when this mu'ahid does not, from his heart, he's not happy about it. Then the Prophet ﷺ says that I am going to argue for this person on the Day of Judgment against that Muslim. Allahu Akbar. Look at that. Look at the protection that Islam is offering to these people who are the dhimmis or the mu'ahids. Okay? So this is important for us to understand that although, yes, Muslims' rights in Islam, their responsibilities are different, and non-Muslims who are living under the protection of the Muslims, their rights and their responsibilities are different, okay? But nonetheless, protection is provided by Islam to one and all. Everyone in the civilized world, dear brothers and sisters, believes in the rule of law. Everyone in the civilized world believes in the rule of law, and that the rule of law is applicable to all. Nobody is above the law, as they say, right? So too does Islam teach that in the Islamic world, the rule of Islamic law is necessary for one and all. Okay? In the Islamic world, Islamic law is the supreme law, and that is what is to be observed and followed. Now, let me mention real quickly a disclaimer. Whatever I'm saying here, whatever we're discussing here, does not mean that you try to start implementing Sharia law in the United States. Okay? This is a different situation that we're living in. Whatever I'm talking about is, I'm talking about in the past when there was Islamic governments, when there was an Islamic political system, or I'm talking about other parts of the world that are close, that they could possibly implement Islamic law, and for whatever reason they have not. But that does not mean that in secular Western states that are democracies, right, that we try to now implement Sharia law. Those are two opposite things. How are they going to go together, right? So we have to be clear on that. We're not trying to establish Sharia law here. Okay, that's not what we're trying to establish. But what we are saying here is that in the Islamic world, Islamic law is the supreme law for one and all, and everybody has to follow it, and nobody is above it. To maintain law and order, safety and security, people need systems in place that provide these things for everybody. Okay? And those systems are known as governments. What's the point of a government? The point of a government is to establish law and order, safety and security. Right? That's what the purpose of a government is. The secular liberal worldview, it argues that religion must be separated from matters of state. This is what the secular liberal worldview presents to us. What's the reason for that? So they tell us that the reason for the separation between the church and state, that's what it means to separate religion. They call it the separation between church and state. So that no religion is in parliamentary houses or places where legislation and laws are made. What is the reason? So that a national religion is not selected. The government does not select a national religion. Or for that, another way of saying that is that one religion is not favored over another religion. That's what we're told. Okay? But what is the real reason? And the reason why I say that that's what we're told is because there have been governments, and I'm talking about Islamic governments, okay, where the national religion was Islam. But guess what? Other minorities, other religions, they had the freedom to practice their religion. So if a Jewish or a Christian government comes into place and causes things like the Holocaust, or causes things like, where minorities are massacred and killed, that's not our problem. That's your problem. That's the fact is that you don't know how to manage your minorities. But in Islamic history, just as we have given examples of, for example, Maimonides, right? We gave you the example of how in Muslim Spain, in Andalus, there was beautiful coexistence between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. There was Baytul Hikmah that was established, the largest library you can say in the world. And Muslims, Jews, and Christians, they contributed to this library. And they excelled in knowledge together. Okay? So if Christians can't do it based on their system of rule, and Jews can't do it, that doesn't mean that Muslims can't do it. Actually, Muslims proved it right from the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, actually. From Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali radiallahu anhum, we showed the world, we set precedent and examples for the world that it is possible that when Islam is in rule, then minorities can freely practice their religion and be provided safety and security. So we're told that this is the reason, so that the government does not adopt a national religion. But the real reason, in my opinion, is so that religion does not shape policies. Because if religion was to shape policies, then for example, a man would never be able to marry a man. A woman would not be able to marry a woman. And they could not freely practice their lutiyah. the stuff that they do that they got from Qawm Lut, they would not be able to practice those things, for example, right? They would not be able to make alcohol permissible and fulfill their desires and their needs. Zina and fornication would be a punishable offense, right? But the reason why they don't want religion to be part of the policy making is because of their desires. Because if religion comes and dictates to us what's halal and haram, then all of our desires and all of our haram activities are, we're going to have to stop doing those things. So, democracy, it has some aspects that are in line with Islamic principles, but there are others that are not. Okay, there's many principles within democracy that are not in line with the Islamic value system. Okay, but there are those policies and those things that are, they could coexist with Islam, and we'll give you some examples of that, inshallah, shortly. Now, what is the purpose of an Islamic government? What are the benefits of an Islamic government? Number one is basically establishment of justice. Something that the world is lacking today. There's no justice. Okay? So, number one is establishment of justice, which includes resolving disputes amongst people, implementing laws according to Islam, which means, like, for example, the hudud. Hudud are part of Islam, and they should be part of an Islamic government. For example, laws of interest, abolishment of interest, that there should be no interest-bearing activities and transactions, etc., etc. Okay, so the first thing is implementation of laws according to Islam, and so on. Number two is the protection of Muslim lives, lands, property, etc. from oppressors. And this also entails that we should establish a military, which is to protect the borders and so on. Because if the borders are not protected, then outsiders can come and invade, and then Muslim lives are on the line, Muslim property is on the line, Muslim honor is on the line, and so on and so forth. So establishing the military is also the job of an Islamic government. Number three, providing safety and removing insecurity, both domestically and internationally, or meaning at the borders. So there are threats that could pop up within the society, within the Muslim government, or within the Muslims' land. So providing safety to all the Muslims from thugs, from looting, from killing, gangs, and things like that, that would be the responsibility of the Islamic government as well. Number four, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is just a few thoughts that came to my mind. Number four is supporting weak and poor people. Okay, so this entails collection of zakah, okay, and the sadaqatul fitr, and when it comes to Eid al-Adha, the udhiyah, and things like that, the Islamic government should set up things where these things could be taken care of. Zakat. There's also a thing called ushr and khumus and things like that. There's produce that comes from the land. The Islamic government is supposed to take a certain percentage of that, and they're also to use it for the welfare of the Muslims. And number five is the establishment of Islam within the borders and the removal of doubts of non-believers. So education. Okay, because one of the biggest enemies of an Islamic society, a Muslim society, is ignorance and the lack of knowledge. It is upon the Islamic government to take care of this void and to create opportunities where the citizens can attain proper education. Now, without these things that have been mentioned above, law, implementation of law, protection, which includes establishment of a military, providing safety, removing insecurity, welfare organizations like zakat and so on and so forth, and then education. Without these things, Muslims have no identity. Muslims will lose their identity, and destruction will become their fate, and the survival of Muslims as a population will become impossible. Okay? Now, because these things cannot be accomplished without an imam, without an Ameer, You can call him a khalifa as well, right? These things cannot be established without that. Therefore, having an Amir, having an Imam is wajib upon the Muslim Ummah. That's why the same day that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam left this world, ila Rafiq al-A'la, to Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala, he went to his better place. The Sahaba, the same day, the Sahaba selected Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh as their Khalifa and as their Imam and the leading figure of the Muslims. This practice of theirs is an evidence and a guide for all the Muslims to come until the Day of Judgment. Okay, because the importance of an Amir is like the importance of a string in a tasbih, in a musabbaha, right? What the string that you do tasbih on. The importance of an Amir is like that string. If the string is broken, then the beads are going to disperse. And once the beads disperse, it becomes very difficult to collect them. And that's exactly the situation that we find ourselves in today. The Muslim Ummah is dispersed. We are not united, we are disunited. And collecting us on one platform and uniting us has become the most difficult task of today's time. And we have divided ourselves based on our race, based on our language, based on our cultures, based on our nationalities and our ethnicities. These things have divided us. Why? Because we don't have an Imam, we don't have an Amir who we can all unite upon. Now, let's talk about what is the Islamic government. Okay? What is the Islamic government? The Islamic government is such a government, number one, whose Imam, Amir, you can call him president if you want, you can call him prime minister if you want. The Imam, the Amir, he leads and guides the citizens by implementing Islamic laws at all levels of life. That is the primary job of the Imam and the Amir, to make sure that Islam is implemented in all aspects of the lives of people. Domestic, financial, economic, political. In all avenues, Islam is present and it is implemented. Okay? That is very important. Number two, an Islamic government is a government whose leaders are all Muslim. That's by definition what an Islamic government is, right? All the leaders of this government, all the people that are in the house, that are parliamentarians or politicians, whatever you want to call them, they are all Muslims. That means that only the Imam being Muslim is not enough. The official religion of the government must be Islam for it to be called an Islamic government. On top of that, additionally, their verbalized goal is following and administering Islamic principles. In other words, they are unapologetically Muslim. It has to be verbalized. Okay? They have to be openly, unapologetically saying that yes, Islam, and that brings me to number three. An Islamic government is that government whose constitution is the Sharia. Their constitution is the Quran. Any government whose constitution is not the Sharia, is not the Quran, and they make policies that go against the Quran and Hadith, they go against Sharia, how can that government be a Muslim government? How can that be an Islamic government? Okay? So that's why I mentioned in number two that the verbalized goal, unapologetically, of this Islamic government is the establishment of Islamic law in all aspects of life within their borders and within their sphere of governorship and leadership. Obviously, dear brothers and sisters, such a government cannot be considered an Islamic government who, number one, does not openly, unapologetically declare it's Islam. Okay? If they are scared to say that they're Muslim, then there's something else influencing them. And Islam is not their primary goal. So they have been compromised. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the verse, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. The end of the ayah says that this person unapologetically and proudly declares that they are Muslim. So we should not hide behind our true identity. We should not hide our Islam. We should openly declare that we are Muslim. Number two, a government cannot be an Islamic government who does not recognize Allah's supremacy over all else. And that brings me back to that ayah, إِنِ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. That the command belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever He commands is really the law. أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ. To Allah belongs the creation and to Allah belongs the command. And number three, obviously, that government cannot be an Islamic government who does not accept the Sharia, who does not accept the Quran as their constitution. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever does not establish law and does not rule based on what Allah has revealed, meaning the Quran and the Sharia, then those people are definitely فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. They can only be kuffar who don't accept Allah's law as the law. And then the next verse says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Those that do not implement the law of Allah, they are zalim. And number three, they are fasiq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. So obviously, dear brothers and sisters, anyone or any group that believes that following the Sharia is not necessary, obviously that person cannot be a Muslim. They can act like they're Muslim outwardly, but inside they have not even accepted Allah as the legislator, as the one who gives law. Islam means to submit. Islam means to follow the commands of Allah. And kufr is the opposite of that. To not want to follow the commands of Allah. To not want to follow and submit to the Sharia. So anywhere, dear brothers and sisters, that there's an Islamic government, that place is known as Darul Islam. And a place where there is not an Islamic government, that place is known as Darul Kufr. Okay? What is Darul Islam? What is Darul Kufr? And then there is a place called Darul Harb as well. Darul Harb is a place of hostility, where Muslims are persecuted, where there's war, and so on. But then there's also Darul Kufr, okay? A place where there's just not the establishment of Islam. So what is Darul Kufr? Any place where Islam and Islamic law is not prevalent. Even though Muslims may have permission to practice Islam. So in the United States, yes, we do have permission to establish masajid. We can grow a beard. A woman can wear her hijab and her niqab. She can do that. But we are only able to practice Islam because we have permission to do so. If tomorrow, like other governments in Europe, I'm not going to take names, but governments in Europe that banned the niqab for women, or governments that banned the hijab, what can a Muslim woman do now? How can she practice her Islam? So you can practice Islam when they allow you to, and you cannot practice Islam when they outlaw things, right? Then is that Darul Islam? Obviously it's not. That's Darul Kufr. So the situation that we live in, where we do have masajid, mashallah, now in the United States, we have reached a point where somebody can start traveling from Los Angeles to New York, and you can probably get every salat of yours in a masjid. That's how many masajid there are. If you travel and plan it properly, you can catch every salat in a masjid on your way from Los Angeles to New York. There was a point in time when that was not the case. There was only a few, select masajid throughout the country. So that's why this is Darul Kufr. I know you're not under any confusion that this is Darul Islam. Obviously it's not, right? It's Darul Kufr. Similarly, any Muslim majority place that's controlled in any way or is dictated to by others is also not Darul Islam. Okay? So there may be a majority of Muslims living in a certain country. Okay, I don't want to take names. This is being recorded. I don't want to take names where now, tomorrow I find out I can't travel to a certain country because I took their name or something like that, right? So I don't want to do that, but certain countries, right, where the population is majority Muslim, but there's outside influence, and they are being influenced to allow LGBTQ plus rights and all that stuff. They're being told to do that. And if you don't do that, oh, we're going to approach the IMF. And you owe this many billions of dollars, and we're going to make your life hell. We're gonna probably put economic sanctions on you if you don't allow gay people to do what they're doing, right? Or if you don't include education of gay rights within your school system. If you don't do that, then we're going to sanction you, and things like that, right? So in such a situation, oftentimes a Muslim government is actually going to give in. Because they're looking at one side, our population is going to start facing inflation. They're going to start facing, poverty. Basic staples and necessities are going to become out of the reach of our ordinary citizens. And on the other hand, all we have to do is just include gay education within our books. Maybe we'll just tell the teachers not to teach it. We'll put it in the books and we'll just tell them not to teach it. So they have a compromise that they have to make. And they're put in a very difficult situation. I'm not saying that anybody who gives in is doing the right thing. Absolutely not. They're not doing the right thing. They should not have put themselves in that position to begin with, right? But that's an argument or a subject for another day. That's the reason why Makkah, dear brothers and sisters, was Darul Harb actually until the conquest of Makkah. Until Fathu Makkah, okay? Makkah was actually Darul Harb, even though the Kaaba was in Makkah. And the Muslims were worshipping Allah in in Makkah as well. But Makkah was still Darul Harb. Why? Because they only practiced because they were permitted to. And as you know, for example, in the 6th year, when the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims, they came from Medina to go and perform Umrah, they were stopped at Hudaybiyah. They were not allowed to perform Umrah. So that's why even Makkah, even though the Kaaba was there, even though there were Muslims that were muwahid, they were worshipping Allah, but still Makkah was Darul Harb until it was conquered through the Fathu Makkah. Okay? So the reason again is that the worship that took place was based on permission that was given by others, the mushrikeen, and not by self-determination. So self-determination is very, very important. So what do we do about today's Muslim countries, right? How do we look at today's Muslim countries? I call them Muslim countries, not Islamic countries. This is a distinction that I'm making here. Even though some of them have Islamic in their name, right? Islamic Republic of Fulan, Islamic Republic of, I'm not going to say names, right? But they have Islamic, some of them have Islamic in their names, but they are not Islamic, okay? The reason why we call them Muslim countries is because of the fact that the majority of the population is Muslim, and that's a very good thing. Alhamdulillah, may Allah increase that. But there are, and I want to inshallah make a reference here, 57 countries in the OIC. 57 Muslim countries in the OIC. What is the OIC? The Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I don't know if you have heard of that, okay? Because 57 Muslim countries, but you probably, if you haven't heard of it, that's exactly the reason why. They have no influence. They have no power. They have no say. Actually, they convened a meeting. I'm just thinking about this on the side, so I'll mention it. They convened a meeting in regards to Gaza, right? Not too long ago. And it was in regards to Gaza, okay? And you know what their agenda and their points were? Cooperation in arts,